just using the skills, they will slowly erode. I came up for the annual review on Hotline, and they tore me apart. Like, that was horrible.
Chris Voss, one of my favorite authors, the founder and CEO of the Black Swan Group, a former FBI hostage negotiator.
When you face challenges, you realize that nobody's bulletproof. And you're going to get crushed. And whenever you got crushed, your parents taught you to get up.
All right, so I'm here, and I'm very, very honored to be with Chris Voss, one of my favorite authors, the founder and CEO of the Black Swan Group, a former FBI hostage negotiator, and author of the amazing best-selling book, Never Split the Difference. Thank you for joining us here on The Billionaire Hour.
My pleasure.
I don't usually get this excited or nervous for some podcast guests, but I'm a very, very big fan of Chris. Read his book many, many times.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. You know, and if I could take off a little bit on you reading and rereading Never Split the Difference. When we're teaching this stuff, one of these things we emphasize to people is, you know, there's a phrase, no man steps in the same river twice. It's not the same river, you're not the same man. So I know from what you're doing, you're learning constantly.
Yeah.
And you're seeing things differently. So every time you read the book, you're going to see something different. So I think that's really cool. I'm impressed by that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, obviously, I know a lot about you, but for the audience who's listening, maybe meeting you for the first time, if you want to give them just a very brief background on yourself.
My father had a small business of his own, grew up in Iowa, blue collar, hard work, and just really hard work and honesty, you know, and figure stuff out. Like my father would just, like when I was 11-ish or so, my dad wanted a new garage in a backyard, so he gave me and my older sister crowbars and said, go back out in the backyard, tear down the old garage. You just figure it out. And that was the way I grew up, the way we grew up. So hard work, integrity, and figure it out. And I don't know that he ever really instilled any fears of anything in me. I think you learn a lot of your fears from your parents. Watch out for this, watch out for that. I don't remember having any of those planted in my head. So I decided I wanted to be in law enforcement, became a cop, and then my father having paid for a college degree, I went and got a job that didn't require one. Like if my kid did that to me, I'd want my money back. You know, I just put all this money in you and you didn't use it. So he got me interested in federal law enforcement, ended up at the FBI because it intrigued me that somebody would let me travel all over the world. I met a Secret Service agent. He said I traveled all over the world, the Secret Service. And where I grew up in a small town in Iowa, you know, crossing the state line to Illinois was a big deal. So I wanted to be a SWAT guy. I was slated to go to the SWAT team with the police department, Kansas City, Missouri. Just before I left, got on the SWAT team, Pittsburgh Bureau, and then re-injured my knee. Again, I've had reconstructive knee surgery 3 times and had the scalpel taken to my knee 5 times total. Then I thought, well, all right, so we got hostage negotiators. Eventually, I'm going to tear my knee apart, and I'm not going to be able to put it back together. The negotiators, I thought, you know, these guys sit around in a nice, warm, dry room while the SWAT guys are laying in the mud, and they talk on the phone. That's what they do for a living. I could do that. And by the time I decided I wanted to do that, I was here in New York. Had a great time working in New York. It was great. I love that. I miss this town a lot. Was rejected for the hostage negotiation team. And then I I told the person that rejected me, what could I do? And she said, go volunteer on a suicide hotline, which I think, you know, there's a phrase, never take advice from people you wouldn't trade places with. Don't take directions from somebody who hasn't been where you're going. And then you got to take that advice. And it's super rare. Like, I'm sure that you listened to people at different points in time in your life who knew what the hell they were talking about, and you did it. And so when I volunteered on a suicide hotline and I came back to the woman in charge in the bureau, she's like, no, you didn't really do that, did you? I'm like, yeah, you said to do it. And she said, I tell everybody to do it. Nobody does it. So taking direction from the right people is the biggest difference. It's one of the biggest differences in life, I think. So then I got in, and it was more fun than being on the SWAT team. And being on a SWAT team, make no mistake, that's a lot of fun. Yeah. You get to be like on live action Disneyland every day. You're training, you're shooting guns, you're jumping out of buildings, you're doing crazy stuff. It's fun. And negotiation was more satisfying. It was cool. So I got trained, and then there's this, every profession, like is a guild, like a secret society, so to speak. And there is a cadre of negotiators globally. Like, we all know each other. We would bump into each other in different embassies around the world, and you'd have a few drinks with them at different times. So that was cool to be part of that. And then they put me in charge of international kidnap response. I had the job at a very lucky time. I had support from me, the street level guy, all the way up to the president of the United States.
Wow.
The guy that ran our division believed in getting the job done, and the director of the FBI was Louis Freeh, and he was committed. If you were going to do anything, you were going to fund it. And then he had a great relationship with Congress and the president, and they supported us in what we did. Because as a hostage negotiator, besides saving lives, you're really there to get the bad guys too. You don't want the bad guys to get away. And so I loved it. And trained with the Harvard Law School negotiation course while I was with the Bureau, and that was kind of my gateway into the afterlife, which is where I'm at now.
Well, now I have 10,000 questions after hearing about the basic background. But, one thing that's been pretty consistent, when we, kind of speak with a lot of different successful people is like the role that your upbringing has in kind of who you are as a person. So growing up in Iowa, I asked a lot of people this, like, what kind of qualities do you get growing up in Iowa that someone that grew up here in New York or in LA would really have?
Well, I don't know that, like, New York is its own special place. Mm-hmm. It's a challenge to be here, and it's very competitive. And if you want to be the best, you go to New York.
Yeah.
For different reasons, you go different places. Like, if you go to LA, if you want to be famous, if you want to be the best ever, you're probably drawn to New York, and it's a different breed of cat. But I think it's blue collar. The more I see these days, the more I kind of see it in whatever ethnic strain you're in. Like, there's a book out there, Born Fighting, about the Scots-Irish and their history in the U.S. They were among their clan, if you will. They're the ones that picked up and were determined to go someplace to make it better. Now, Scots-Irish do not have the market cornered on that. Mm-hmm. And if you look around, you start to see it. Every different ethnicity has got a bloodline buried in it where the people are entrepreneurial, and they believe they can make a difference in their life. And lately, I'm a huge fan of Cody Sanchez. Her family's from Spain, what the Hispanics would call Castilian. And they're very similar. They picked up and they moved. Mm-hmm. Castro's family was from Spain. The ability to think that you can make the world a better place, you can make a difference in your life. And so no ethnicity's got the market cornered on it. Mine happen to be Irish, mostly Irish. Mm-hmm. But I think that's it. I think, and then when you face challenges, if you learn and you realize that nobody's bulletproof, mm-hmm. and you're going to get crushed. And whenever you got crushed, your parents taught you to get up and shake it off, walk it off.
Yeah.
So I think that strain, it existed in Iowa, blue collar, Midwest, non-judgmental. But I think it's everywhere. When you start looking for it, it's a lot of places.
Yeah. What was your upbringing like, and I guess what role did your parents have on that? I guess in terms of like a work ethic.
Yeah, no, it was just, my father put us to work as early as we were able. We got allowances. He had his own business. He was very entrepreneurial. He wasn't particularly good at building teams. Mm-hmm. There weren't that many people that lasted working for my dad. And some of his colleagues, because he was very direct. He was a very assertive guy. But it was figured out. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom, but she believed that we should earn stuff. Mm-hmm. I'd want something, and she'd be like, all right, save up for it. Mm-hmm. And so they taught me to work hard and to figure things out and to be honest. It's kind of real simple, straightforward stuff that happens to be as Jordan Peterson would say, the best long-term strategy for success.
Yeah. So, having that strong work ethic, I mean, what sparked your interest in law enforcement, wanting to go on the SWAT team?
Yeah. At about 16, I saw a movie about two New York City cops.
Okay.
And it was called The Super Cops. It was based on two guys that were really wildly creative, and they had a great time doing extraordinary things, doing a great job. I didn't realize at the time they were really mavericks, which most entrepreneurs, don't work well for others. Yeah. You're unemployable. You got to work for yourself. And these guys were real mavericks and ridiculously creative. I was blown away that their fun, innovative ideas of outsmarting the bad guys and surprising the bad guys. And they worked in the neighborhood of Bed-Stuy in New York City at the time, which was a really tough neighborhood. Mm. And it was black neighborhood, African American, and they were, I think they were an Irish and an Italian guy, and the community loved them, because people. Skin color and ethnicity goes away real fast when people start finding out who you are. Mm-hmm. Are you a decent person? Are you honest? Are you hardworking? And in every community, no matter how bad the neighborhood is, there's still the majority of them. There's still a lot of really good people there, and they want law enforcement, and they want good cops, and they want people that care for their community. And the community loved these guys. And I was really taken with how creative they were. I remember when I was at the FBI Academy. Day one, the guy in charge of the academy walks in each class and says, in one word, say what you bring to the FBI. And I remember saying creativity. And I love the idea of being creative in law enforcement. And I was always a bit of a maverick. I finally apologized to my last boss in a bureau because when my son helped me build my company. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago, I remember thinking, he didn't tell me anything. I mean, I'm in the dark. I don't know what the hell's going on. He gets stuff done. I don't have a problem with what he's doing, but I got no idea what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, that's what I did to everybody that I ever worked for in the FBI. So at the time, the last boss I had was Gary Nessner, great guy, a mentor. And I sent him a text message that said, my son is exactly like me. I owe you an apology.
That's so funny. So making the transition into the hostage negotiating realm, what was that like? And I mean, was that daunting? Were you more excited? And were you looking to change the current way that things were done? I feel like being an entrepreneur, right? Yeah. And kind of that maverick mentality I don't want to say ostentatious, but essentially you're looking at the way everything's done. You're saying, I can do this better than everyone. And I think that's a quality that a lot of these entrepreneurs have. So looking at, the current system, what encouraged you to get in there and kind of change it up?
Well, yeah. I love the way you asked that question, because when I was working, before I became a negotiator, I'm working terrorism here in New York. And we were all basically creating new ways of doing it. At the time, they were actually they thought we had defeated terrorism, and they were dismantling the terrorist task force. And we're like, no, there's stuff here that's still to be done. So we're doing things in a very innovative way that, by and large, upper management wasn't enthusiastic about. I can remember one time we're in the middle of we made great cases. We made huge cases. First Trade Center investigation and everything after it. And so the inspectors from D.C. are in, and the biannual inspection of the office, and they sit down, and different times they have different administrative mandates. And when they happen to come through at that time, they want to make sure that management was doing a good job leading, mm-hmm. as opposed to just managing. And the inspector sat down with me and he says, you guys are in good shape, so you can be honest with me. You got a big case, director cares about it. You don't have to hide anything. How's management help you guys? And I looked at him and I said, we have made it a point to disregard everything management has ever told us. But it was, plowing a new area, as you said, doing it better. So when I became a negotiator, I'd already been volunteering on a suicide hotline for that time about 2.5 years. And I had gained an appreciation of the power of empathy, what I refer to now in the book is tactical empathy, the application, the intentional application of emotional intelligence with a collaborative mindset. I want to work with you. I want to get my way, but I don't want you to hate me for it, and I want you to feel like you were better off along with me. So when I knew that worked, and when I got into hostage negotiation, it was a lot of emphasis on like convincing. They paid lip service to what was called active listening, but they didn't really do it, and they didn't do it proactively. Like people are so predictable if you're willing to see. There's a great line from the book and the movies Dune, and it's hope obscures observation. Like if you're running around hoping how people should act, you're missing it. So if you really look, you can see it, and then it becomes, if you're entrepreneurial, then you start applying. Like, all right, so if I know it's going to happen, why don't I prepare for it? So I really brought that into the hostage negotiation. My boss was a big believer in it, but not that many people in the field practiced it. And then when I started doing international kidnapping, by and large is just really mean bargaining. I mean, just, the kidnappers are bargaining, but they're really, really mean. And so I thought, well, empathy's going to catch these guys off guard. They're not going to know what to do with it because they're used to people, being hard bargainers, demanding, name calling, the worst lawyer you can imagine.
Yeah.
Right? And I thought, let me try it. Let me hit these guys. Empathy is going to be a sneak attack on a bad guy. And they're not going to know how to handle it. And so I started making differences in cases, just using this stuff that I learned on the hotline and putting it in up against mean bargainers and just getting the upper hand on these guys. And I think that, and I was determined to do it. And then I was determined to teach everybody else, like, this crisis intervention stuff, we take it over here with really tough characters. And I think that was one of the big differences.
So you pioneered kind of bringing in these other aspects of negotiation and crisis hotline into kind of the field, and obviously taught that to a lot of other people there. Now, your first day, I want to jump into the suicide hotline. I feel like when a lot of people think of stressful jobs, that's probably up there on one of the most stressful jobs. I mean, what was day one like? And I guess, what does that do to you on a mental state? Like, I don't think I could ever do that.
Right, yeah. Well, they do a great job of prepping you. And the advantage that I had over almost everybody else that volunteered, because if you're going to volunteer on a suicide hotline, you want to help, which makes you emotionally vulnerable. Now, I went to learn a skill. And so then I'm fascinated by everything that's going on. And, I'm not emotionally vulnerable because I want to help. And a dynamic that a lot of people don't realize is approximately 40% of the phone calls that a suicide hotline gets is just from highly manipulative energy vampires. The people that are they're so negative and so passive aggressive that nobody in the world, everybody that they know is sick of talking to them. So when everybody's sick of talking to you, what do? Call somebody who has to talk to you. It's a suicide hotline. And that's suicide hotlines. Their number one problem is volunteer burnout. Financing is the number two problem. The two assets are the volunteers and the financing. But there are so many manipulative people that call in, and the volunteers get burned out. And so the dynamic that's burning everybody else out, I was fascinated by it. It's like, wow, this is crazy. And then that prepped me for the number of manipulative people that there are scattered throughout everyday life, whether they're a relative, whether they're a neighbor, whether they're a colleague, or whether they're a customer. And so I was fascinated by it. And then I really studied it and got into it. And so since I was fascinated by it and wanted to learn from it, then you run into glitches. You learn what my boss, Gary Nessner, used to say, best chance of success, which means no matter how good you are, stuff's going to go bad. And So then if you're on a hotline, something's going to go bad. Someone on the phone, or you know what happened, or somebody's impossible to reach. And if you're a hostage negotiator, something's going to go bad.
Yeah.
So I was prepped for the negativity early on by the training that I got, and that the training was great.
Yeah.
And it made all the difference in the world.
How do you separate like just being human with kind of wanting to learn? I mean, again, like, you know, you have these people that are calling in, you know, kind of at the ends of multiple strings. I mean, how do you do your job, learn? I mean, obviously you're there to learn and pick up this skill, but also not let that personally affect you.
You learn the hard way. On the hotline, there were a lot of people that were there. There was always a supervisor on a shift who did, if you had a good one, worked really hard to make sure that your head was in the right place, joking around with you. One guy in particular who had a big impact on me, he probably joked around. I was almost like, let me get on the phone, stop joking around. But humor is a great defense mechanism. It triggers chemicals that make you healthier. There's a TED Talk by Sean Acker, a Harvard psychologist, that contends that you're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. So here was this great mechanism for coping. And then I didn't realize it at the time, since I was so interested in the process. Curiosity is a superpower. If you read Man's Search for Meaning, which is kind of on, if you're on a journey of reading, you know, there's a number of books you got to read. You mentioned Robert Greene. You got to read Greene's books. You got to read Cialdini's books. But everybody talks about Man's Search for Meaning. I didn't even know what it was about. I just knew that it was on the must-read list. It's about the people that survived the Jewish concentration camps of World War II. And the writer survived, and he talks about curiosity as being the single greatest survival mechanism of the concentration camps. So curiosity is one of the ways to cope with the inevitable, horrific things that happen in life. And because I was deeply curious and I never expected anything to be perfect, and stuff got to me occasionally. There's a few things that still get to me. But the realization, those two things, I think, equip you a lot to survive.
Yeah. Now, you know, learning the skills of the suicide hotline, you know, I know you briefly mentioned transitioning that into the kind of hostage negotiation aspect. What was really missing from the hostage negotiation kind of framework that existed when you started?
First of all, the recognition that our communication skills were perishable. I had found that out the hard way on the hotline because I came up from my annual review on the hotline. And I went through the training, and I knew I did a good job of the training because I'm coachable, I'm trainable. But just using the skills, they will slowly erode. You know, one of my favorite analogies is Tiger Woods. Like, Tiger Woods spent more time practicing golf than he spent at tournaments. And he always wanted to get better. He'd win a tournament, and they'd say, oh, you know, don't you feel great, how phenomenal it is? And his answer would be like, yeah, but I can still get better. And he'd put the trophy on a shelf. He wouldn't go party for a week. He'd get the jacket, he'd take the pictures with the trophy, put it on a shelf, and he'd go back to practicing. And so I came up for the annual review on a hotline, and they tore me apart. Like, that was horrible. And I remember thinking, like, how could it be? I did all my shifts. I've been doing this for a year. But I found out that the skills eroded. So when I got in the bureau, I became very conscious, as a negotiator, I became very conscious that if I didn't guard against losing the skills, that they would erode. So I did the stuff that they wanted me to do skill maintenance. I taught a lot. I read constantly. You know, I was always looking to solve problems. And then one of the big, I changed how we approach proof of life. Because I'm working a case in the Philippines, and I had never gotten a hostage on the phone as proof of life. And I didn't know anybody that ever had. We always ask the proof of life question, which is like your bank security question. You know, if you lose your password, they say, what's the name of your first dog? You know, who was your first grade teacher? Who was your father's middle name? All that stuff. Well, that's proof of life in a hostage negotiation. And we never got anybody on the phone. So I'm working this kidnapping in Philippines. It went bad, by the way. A lot of people got killed. And in the middle of it, it gets reported back to us by, one of the other government agencies that our hostage is on the phone with somebody. And I'm like, I saw a puzzled look on your face, kind of like, what the F?
Yeah.
And that's exactly my reaction. I'm like, first of all, who are they talking to if they're not talking to me? And secondly, whoever it is, how the hell they get them on a phone? And I was really looking to solve that for a long time. And then probably about a year later, I'm listening to this kidnapping in Pittsburgh, and a drug dealer's girlfriend's been kidnapped by another drug dealer. And it's gone to the FBI, because who do you go to? The FBI, even if you're a drug dealer. And he says on the phone to the other guy, hey, dog, how do I know she's okay? And the other kid, the other drug dealer, hesitates, and his voice changes. And you can tell he's lost control, and he doesn't even know it. And instead of being assertive, he's kind of like, well, I'll put him on the phone. I'm like, that's it. And what it was that under a high-pressure situation, with life on the line, there's still some fair questions. And basically, how do I know I'm dealing with an honest person? Or how do I know I'm dealing with somebody who's going to deliver? Is a fair question. Mm-hmm. And the bad guy had to admit it was a legitimate question, which starts with the word how, which does this whole different change in a person's brain. And so when I listened to that guy do that, I said, we're changing everything. And the unit that I was in, the crisis negotiation unit, was, if I can consider myself part of the brain trust, the other guys around me were really smart. So somebody bring in an idea, and I had a great team. I'm like, this is what I'm thinking. Am I smoking something here? And they're like, no. As a matter of fact, we think you're onto something. So I fleshed it out internally with the guys that I worked with who were really smart. And then we flipped the switch and said, this way we're doing it from now on. And I loved innovating, creativity. And that was one of the biggest changes that we made. And it saved a bunch of lives.
Wow. Now, bringing new tactics to all of these other kind of like hostage negotiators, were people ready to take on your ideas? Were people like, I don't know, Chris, you just brought this up. I don't know if that's a legit thing.
No, I got a lot of I don't knows.
Yeah.
And very much like my father, I'm kind of assertive. And the first case we tried it in, and I underestimated, how scary it was going to be to change everything for the guys in the field. And we're working a case in Ecuador, and I got negotiators in country, because most of the time I'm running the operation from D.C., and I'm deploying negotiators. And the negotiators that are working for me, they know me pretty well. They don't really like this, but they're willing to do it. Now, we hear back afterwards, because my guys are working with the locals, the Gaula in Ecuador, the Gaula. And the Gaula's like, no, we ain't doing it like that. That's not how we do it in Ecuador. You don't know our market. And my negotiators were really persistent. Now, our hostage ends up escaping. It was a great case. And our change in the whole dynamic is what created the window with the bad guys for him to escape. So he escapes, and then his family's from upstate New York. And his story of hostage survival, I'm still inspired by today. A dude's name is Pepe. And Pepe was a genius inside. But I can't wait to find out, because I tried a new proof of life approach, and we never got proof of life. And so I'm up interviewing him and his wife. And first of all, his wife says, look, I knew there was tension between the FBI and the Gala. I knew they were arguing about something, but I appreciated the fact that they never let me see them disagree. When they interacted with me, they were always supportive, but I knew there was tension. And the tension was there because I had changed our approach. And my guys were like, no, we're doing it like this. And so she followed the instructions. She did a great job. She was very coachable. So when Pepe escapes, and I'm talking to him upstate New York, I want to know what happened. Like, I want to find out how he is, but my strategy, my brilliant idea didn't seem to work because we never got proof of life. And so I'm like, through the horses thing, we were doing this and we don't know what happened. He said, man, I'm telling you, it changed the way they dealt with each other. He said, because in a normal kidnapping case, like in any business corporation, you got a guy working for you, and he's got to go make a deal for your jets or for your fuel or whatever your main is. You send that guy out there with parameters. His job is to make the deal in the parameters and come back with the deal. And then you look at it and you go like, yes or no. Yeah. Bad guys work the same way. It's a business operation. They got a negotiator, they got a chain of command, they got bosses, they got workers. They're supposed to send their negotiator to town, stay on the phone, make phone calls till he's got a deal, and then after he's got a deal, go back to where everybody is in the jungle and say, hey, boss, this is the deal I got. And the boss is either thumbs up or thumbs down. What we did was we caused the bad guy to constantly go back out to the jungle where his boss was and say, hey, they keep asking us, how do they know Pepe's alive? What do you think? Should we take him to town and put him on the phone? And Pepe says they were constantly talking about this, which is what changed him from being a commodity to a person with them. Mm-hmm. And so they started treating him differently. They started acting, he was no longer a commodity, he was Pepe. They actually started calling him Don Pepe, because when he saw this difference in their approach, he recognized an opening to humanize himself even more. Mm-hmm. And they almost became friends with him inside. And when he realized that they weren't guarding him as closely, he got the opportunity to bail out of where they were holding him at about 2:00 in the morning in a rainstorm. He was a jungle guy. He loved the jungle, so he knew where the nearest town was, which was a ways, but he knew where it was. And he knew if he could get just 20 minutes head start on them in the rain, they'd never be able to follow him. Mm-hmm. So he lays all this out when he gets back, and I'm talking to him. And I'm like, wow, we changed how the bad guys talk to each other in a way that had never been done before. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I knew that the innovation had worked.
Yeah. Now, what were the troubles getting people to like try this new system? And I guess was there a point where you're like, listen, I have a proof of concept, this works.
Right.
Your method sucks, mine's better.
Yeah, it's another negotiation. Mm-hmm. It really is, because you're trying to get people out of a methodology they're comfortable with. They got a percentage win rate. Convincing someone that your win rate will increase is a tough sell, because what's that phrase, cheer up, things could be worse? I cheered up and things got worse. Everybody's afraid of it getting worse. And, getting people to buy into something innovative is really, really scary. And so then it's a combination. It's a lot more than just telling somebody. It's a negotiation. Mm-hmm. And then you either find people to work with you that are naturally innovative and creative and they love a new idea. And if there are people around, there are some people that have been on the deploying on the international team, and I fired. Like, if you're not going to do what I want you to do, I'm going to ask you nicely. But if you're too scared to change, you're out of a job. Yeah. And there were some, when I took over the program, there were some seasoned guys that had been out a lot. It didn't like my new ideas. And they had a relationship with my boss, Gary. And they went to him, and Gary backed me up every time. He was like, Chris is running the show. If he don't want to send you, I can't help you. I had a number of people go to him and thinking they could go over my head, and he backed me up 100%.
Wow. Now, out of all the hundreds, I'm assuming thousands of cases, right, in your lifetime and career that you've worked on, are there one or two cases that still keep you up at night that you have to think about?
Well, the one that was the worst that caused it led to the change in our proof of life Martin Burnham. He was killed in a friendly fire, by friendly fire. Guillermo Sabero was an American citizen naturalized that was murdered by the bad guys early on in the case. And we hadn't yet got our arms around the case at that point in time, and the bad guys just to make a point. So what hurt me the most at the time was when Martin got killed, because we thought we were going to get him out. We thought we were going to get him and his wife Gracia out. Gracia was shot and wounded in the leg in the same volley of gunfire that killed her husband. And that did bother me. It still bothers me. It bothered me a lot at the time, until finally I'm listening to a presentation by another negotiator where an infant had been killed. It was an incident in D.C. where this child had been killed, and he's given a presentation, and at the end of it, he's still struggling with it. He says, I don't know why I always give this presentation to the school. I suppose it's because I want to talk about something bad that happened to me on a winter day. And I remember thinking at the time, bad that happened to you. It wasn't your child. It wasn't your blood. It was somebody that you never even met. It's kind of arrogant for you to say it was bad to you, because when it's nothing compared to what the mother went through. And when I said that to myself about him, I said, I've been doing the same thing to myself. Like, if Martin Burnham was not my father, for me to feel bad about that, or to say it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, I'm not his son. It's not my dad. It's not my brother. I'm not his wife. I shouldn't, it's ridiculous of me to take that much on, take it that personal. And I snapped out of it a lot at that time, when I realized, comparative to what Martin's family went through, I didn't go through nothing.
Wow. Now, for a lot of business owners that obviously have issues that they solve, now nothing to that degree, what advice would you have for them on separating kind of yourself?
As long as you're doing what you're doing with integrity, it's kind of what it boils down to. Stuff's going to go bad. Your job, best chance of success, which means there's no guarantee of success, which means things are going to go bad. You're going to do stupid stuff that you would fire yourself for. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do stupid stuff, then you're not learning enough. An entrepreneur that I have tremendous amount of respect for, Michael Mulgill, founder of Crisp Video, and it's been around 13, 14 years, out of Atlanta. They started out doing video advertising for attorneys. Michael started on a bar desk in the back of a drugstore by himself with a laptop. And now he's got this phenomenally successful operation. He's running annual conferences. One of the last annual conference he ran, he had it in Atlanta Falcons Stadium. Wow. And Michael likes to say that if you don't look back on where you were a year ago and are embarrassed at how stupid you were, then you haven't learned enough over that year, no matter how old you are. So what does that mean? You're going to do dumb stuff. You're going to make mistakes with employees. You're going to make bad business decisions. Most of the bad decisions are probably going to be born out of hesitation due to fear of the consequences. Are you going to hire bad people, or you're not going to mentor somebody as much as you should have mentored them, and you will lose them because you should have mentored them more. And so you probably should have mentored them more. That doesn't mean you still wouldn't have fired them. There's two things in any relationship. Could you have done it better? Without question. Would that change the outcome? That's totally up in the air. I could have been a better husband to my ex-wife. Far better man. I could have been a far better man than I was. That doesn't mean it would save the relationship. Mm-hmm. So the acceptance of those two contradictory things simultaneously. As an entrepreneur, you're going to do some stupid stuff. You're going to look back on a decision you made a year ago and go, boy, that was dumb. That's part. You got to move on. Mm-hmm. That's necessary for you to help as much as you possibly can, and continue to learn. Mm-hmm. And you stop screwing up, then you've gotten too coward.
Definitely. So When did you get the idea to write the book, Never Split the Difference?
I got out of the bureau. I went back. I got a master's degree at Harvard and a special program for people transitioning at the Kennedy School of Government. It was a great way to come out. And there were people there that were telling me, like, as a consultant, you got to have a book. You're going to be a consultant. If you don't have a book, people are going to say, well, you must not be that good. You don't have a book. So you got to have a book. And everybody said, write the book right away. And I didn't do that. I waited. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just writing a book to get a business card out there that cost people $20 to pick up. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to make sure we knew what we were doing. We had proof of concept, if you will. There was a negotiator, NYPD guy, Dominic Messino. Dominic was a great negotiator. And he wrote a book as soon as he left the PD called Talk to Me, which was kind of like, here's what we did as a hostage negotiator, and then try that out. It should work in your life, which is not enough. We needed to prove it in the real world. And so I taught at Georgetown. And when I'd been teaching there long enough, at that point in time, my son was getting involved and helping me develop the process. We felt we had enough together to write a book, a full system, where people at Georgetown in negotiations from everything from $1 billion deal to Wall Street to a negotiation between a husband and wife over a Christmas tree, we showed and outlined it step by step and using the skills exactly what was said. So I had proof of concept outside of hostage negotiation. It also wasn't me. It was just, regular people having to be at business school. And so we bundled that together, and I found a good agent, Steve Voss. And then ultimately, Tall Roz is like the guy to write business books. Tall's a sweetheart of a guy. I don't know he's ever tried to write a kid's story or even fiction. Books are like cars. Mm-hmm. You can't take an F1 off-road. And so you got to write that book. And Tall writes business books like nobody. Every book he's touched has been a New York Times or Wall Street Journal bestseller. I'd read the book he did with Keith Ferrazzi, Never Eat Alone, and loved it. And so I got in a position to write and have Tall be the co-writer. So you got an agent, you got a good co-writer, that's your team. And that's when we felt we had the whole system down. Mm-hmm. That's when we got Tall engaged and wrote the book.
And when the book launched, was that picked up by a lot of people in the kind of like negotiation community?
No, it took a while.
Yeah.
It took a while.
Because the book launched in 2016.
2016, opening day one, we got a publicist that got me on Fox News and Fox Business. And so we broke into the top 10 on Amazon on the first day. But then it slowly slid and it fell off a cliff, like it dropped. Probably somewhere ranked worse than 1,000. I don't know how bad how far it dropped, but not in bestseller status initially. And so I started doing podcasts, and then slowly, business people want to learn, so they're gonna listen to a podcast, and just steady. Now I like to do still. Tall told me at the very beginning, you got to get out there and promote that book for at least a year, maybe 2. And my work ethic from my dad, I was like, it ain't going to be 2 years. It's going to be a lot longer than that. You watch. I'll never stop promoting it. And so then the word started to get around the business community. And then people who like to read, like, oh, yeah, let me pick up a book to read to learn, because it got great reviews. It's got great ratings. Everybody that rates it says, like I made a deal that I never made before. And so either they picked it up because they like to read, they were readers, or somebody that they knew said, hey, I made this stuff work. And they needed a peer review, somebody that they knew to recommend them. And so it slowly picked up steam, and now it continues to do really well. But I continue to make it a point to be on a podcast with somebody like you.
Thank you.
Who speaks entrepreneurs, who's got a decent, who's walked the talk, and has done it, and now you want to help other people have as much fun as you're having.
Definitely. Now, one question I'm dying to ask. So when I got your book and I read it the first time, I started using it on my girlfriend. And, every time we're deciding where we want to go for dinner, I'd throw in some questions there, and I'd do the full accusation on it. I'd be like, listen, you're thinking I'm the worst person ever. I know we went to Chipotle yesterday, but it'd be really great if we went there again. And she was so just enamored by how effective it was, to the point where the first couple weeks she had no idea I was using on her. Then I let her read it. Now we pretty much both do it to each other.
Nice, yeah.
So having this knowledge, does that ever cloud your judgment of the world, where now you go around and you can kind of talk your way into certain things?
No, because it's a negotiation approach that's about succeeding with people. Long-term trusted relationship should be your goal.
Yeah.
If it was a book that was about taking advantage of somebody,
yeah,
then the person that you're dealing with, you can't do it with your significant other, because it's not built on trust.
Yeah.
And you got a great example. You guys both want to trust each other, and you want to be emotionally taken care of, nurtured, understood, validated. It's great for a relationship. So I think almost everybody wants that. So that ends up being, the best long-term strategy. And as it doesn't jade my view of the world, what it does is it makes me see how many people are dying for it and they don't know. And they just don't know. Or they're creating tons of friction in their life. And they don't view negotiation as collaboration. They view it as win-lose. If you think it's win-lose, then it's not collaboration, because then, your significant other's got to lose.
Yeah.
Like, why should they lose? They shouldn't lose. So if you look at it as collaboration, I see the number of people that are hungry for it. And then sometimes somebody's just so jaded that they're not going to buy in. That's rare. And then I just know who that person is. Like the hotel I'm staying here in town, we have a very specific approach, almost a formula, 3-step, for getting a suite upgrade.
Okay.
And so what's stopping you from getting a suite upgrade in a hotel? Number one thing is, do they feel like giving it to you? That's number one. Never be mean to somebody who could hurt you by doing nothing. Almost everybody could help you if they felt like it, including the people in the hotel. So the real issue is, are you a jerk? Are you demanding? Are you aggravating? There's the annoyance tax. They're going to make you pay the annoyance tax. And then do they have it? Like, they could feel like it, but if they don't have it, it's an inventory issue. So the hotel I'm in right now, I actually changed rooms because, you take the approach. The person feels good about it. They never feel exploited. And you can tell right away if they check the computer, see what they got. If somebody says, no, or you don't have this status, instantly whether or not they're actually looking at the computer and checking the inventory. And this girl, immediately she goes in, she's checking the inventory. She says, I give it to you 2 nights, but I can't give it to you for the 3rd night. You have to come down and change rooms. And this is for nothing. And I thought about it, it's a pain in the neck, but I'm going to enjoy the room enough. I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love it. And so not only do you get the upgrade, but the issue is if they can't give it to you, there's almost always a secondary ask. You're going to need something else from the front desk. So if they give it to you, you don't want them to resent you for having gotten it, because they ain't going to help you with anything else. Like, I got status. Look at my status here. I know you have it. You can kind of bully them into it. You come back down to the front desk for anything after that, they're like, no, we don't have it. And if they don't give it to you, they want to feel connected enough to you in the process that when you come back around, You weren't the annoying guy who asked for something they couldn't have. You were a pretty good guy that they enjoyed talking with, and they were happy to help you again. And so how you get your deal is so important because there's always going to be a relationship afterwards. Like even with a car, you buy, you pound them over the price of the car. You got to come back there for service. One of the students in my class at Georgetown, there's a bargaining system in the book, the Ackerman method, named for Mike Ackerman. I can hammer you on the price. It's really, really effective. So one of my students uses it at a Home Depot to get cabinets. Super happy with the price he got on the cabinets. Killed the person. They ran into a problem on installation. He's back at Home Depot a week and a half later. That guy remembers getting slaughtered for the price of the cabinets. He's like, nah, we're going to have to charge you extra for that.
That's so funny. So, I guess, after the book comes out, obviously the book does very, very well after the podcast we're promoting. When did you launch the Black Swan Group and what you're doing today? And what was your mission with that?
Well, the Black Swan Group, I actually launched that as soon as I left the Bureau in 2008. And, nobody wanted to be trained by a former hostage negotiator because he didn't have a book. If you're really good, I would have heard it. I would have heard already. You just got out of the government and you're trying to tell me what to do? No. So we had a couple of clients that were, one client in particular was a parent of a student in my class. And she went to her dad, who was an executive in the healthcare industry, and she's like, Dad, hire this guy. You're an idiot if you don't. Don't hire him. You know what? Don't hire him. Leave all that money on the table. And he knew his daughter was really smart. He trusted her, so he gave us some work, and we did, and we got great results for him. But it still wasn't enough. So we struggled along. I'm getting by mostly on my pension. I had a pension that's kind of keeping us afloat. I knew I could pay the bills. We get an occasional gig. But when the book came out and then people started seeing proof of concept, then it just slowly built, and we're doing really well right now. We got some people got a lot of money, a lot of skin in the game, a lot of money in the game, and they're trusting us because they know their industry. But when they make a mistake, we know how to help them fix it. Or if they don't even know they're making mistakes.
So in 2025, what's next for the Black Swan Group? And I guess what's next for you specifically? Any new books on the horizon?
Well, two of the guys on my team are finishing up a book that we're calling the Operations Manual for Tactical Empathy. They're as good or better at this than I am, but since they haven't written a book, nobody knows who they are. So that'll probably be out in the fall. Of the crazy part of the journey. Entrepreneurs, we're doing crazy stuff. We're putting out a bourbon.
Wow.
And the bourbon is by subscription only. It's called The Difference. Mm-hmm. Never split, always share.
Nice.
It's to celebrate business success. And it's going to be available not retail, only as a subscriber. And it's actually, we're going to be starting to ship it this month, March.
That's exciting. We'll have to pick some up.
That is of all the things that my father would have gotten the biggest kick out of. He was a Scotch drinker. Mm-hmm. His son had a bourbon. He'd be like, well, I'll switch to bourbon and you're going to give it to me for free because I gave you room and board growing up.
That's so funny. I can't wait to pick up this bourbon. I think this is something that we're going to have to get and definitely promote on our socials. But again, Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming here on the podcast. This has been a fantastic discussion. I feel like I know you better, and I'm so just honored and happy that I got to chat with the author of one of my favorite books. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Now, one last little thing that we do for all guests here on the Billionaire Hour is we did get you a small present.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Wow. It's very kind.
So us being a private aviation company, that is a Amalfi One private jet card membership. Activated with $5,000, access to 3,500 airplanes across 170 countries. And it is heavier than the Amex Luxurian Energy Award.
This is really cool. And I'm looking forward to taking this for a test drive.
Of course. Happy to welcome you on board the next Amalfi flight. Thank you again, Chris. It's been amazing here on the Billionaire Hour, and we look forward to following along on future stuff. Everything at Amalfi Jets and the socials for the Black Swan Group, and at Chris Voss. Do you want to plug your socials?
At the FBI Negotiator on Instagram.
Perfect. Go follow. Thank you, guys.